When I was younger and I first came into industry, I went out to all of the sectors that I was working in, going to factories and things like that. It was, real engineering on shop floors and stuff, and was told many times, and so friendly, so nice. A woman, no offence, that's about no offence. I've got brilliant women that work for me,
I've seen a lot of this historically in terms of a fixation with quotas, numbers, targets, and again, it's one of the things that we try to help our clients get an understanding of. That it's not just about the numbers, it's also about the qualitative side of things. So what are people's experiences? What they don't tell you is that actually the men that are on that board have been there for like 10, 15 years. The women cycle through, so every single year there's a new woman on the board.
What happens in a scenario, in your opinion, where somebody says, okay, skill-wise, this person's aligned, but is a completely different demographic to what we've hired before? Or skills-wise, there's transferable skills, but actually there's someone that is more suited, but there's a big benefit that this person is female or neurodivergent, or there's a different kind of demographic situation going on there. Which should they hire? Because we always hear the best person, but what is the best person? So the question is, representation for representation's sake? Question mark.
Okay. It's a big one.
It's giving tick box.
Yeah. Representation for representation's sake.
What springs to mind for you? And I'll say what springs to mind for me.
For me, it's like tokenism. And I've seen a lot of this historically in terms of a fixation with quotas, numbers, targets, and again, it's one of the things that we try to help our clients get an understanding of. That it's not just about the numbers, it's also about the qualitative side of things. So what are people's experiences? And the perfect example I can give is that you often see these businesses where they're like, we've got 50-50 gender diverse board and we've got 10%, 20% ethnic minority representation. What they don't tell you is that actually the men that are on that board have been there for like 10, 15 years. The women cycle through, so every single year there's a new woman on the board. The ethnic minority individuals cycle through as well, so every year there's a different token ethnic minority person. And that doesn't tell a good story of what does it mean to have a certain status in a business. What does it mean for the business to genuinely appreciate who you are outside of your identity? So what you bring to a role, investing in you over the long term rather than investing in the optics of what you bring from a visual representation perspective. What are your thoughts?
This is like the multi-million-dollar question that I feel like I'm constantly asked. I'm a recruiter. I'm an exec search. We can say it however we want, but we're recruiters. So everything we do is talent orientated. And then we've got some clients that are obviously wanting to change some of the demographics in their business because of all of the benefits and well-being and belonging for everybody. And we've got some clients that don't, or are really kind of anti. And funnily enough, as soon as I read that this morning, I read a post from another recruitment leader. She sent it to me and she was featured with her and her two daughters, and they're talking about diversity. And it's just that it's a mother and two daughters, and they all look different and have had a different journey, but they're actually mother and daughters. And there was some really controversial comments on there because they were kind of like, well, what do you mean? Some, understandably, maybe there's some naivety there. People are talking about that, but we're talking about diverse perspectives was the point of her daughter. And I read on there, second comment down was, oh, ED&I is just a tick boxing exercise. Just hire, this is the quote I hear every day, just hire the best person from the job was, And I looked at the individual, Steve, and I looked at the individual and he was a senior individual, had a fantastic career. I was intrigued, interesting, because that's quite a public thing to say. It was a viral post. And I just thought, really interesting. But he's also shared his own thoughts and feelings, And the question that I had in my mind, is that naivety? Is there a prejudice there? Is there just a misunderstanding in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about diversity of perspective, It's
one that we get all the time in terms of like, I don't I don't care about diversity. I don't care whether someone's pink, blue, orange. I just want the best person for the job. And fundamentally is a statement that is uncontroversial, I would say.
Yeah.
I think organisations, people generally want the best person for the job.
And need the best person for the job.
The issue becomes when we start to project what that means and extrapolate what that means. To say, actually, I've had a man that's been doing this role for the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Therefore, the best person for the job is a man. Or as a white man, or as a middle-aged, middle-class white man.
Yeah.
That is an unreasonable assumption to make, and I think sometimes people project that and take it to the extremes. The example that I always give is kind of the prestige that comes with institutions like Oxford and Cambridge, and you know, somebody going to that, those universities, those institutions. Naturally, people associate it with greatness.
Yeah.
However, what they're not seeing is the pathways to get into Oxford and Cambridge, and actually how skewed they are.
Yeah.
Both in terms of socioeconomic background, but also in terms of race and ethnicity, and again, some of these things that come out the other side in terms of if you're looking
and
just
accessibility.
For Oxford and Cambridge. Absolutely. If you're looking for just like Oxford and Cambridge graduates, you're automatically limiting the amount of diversity you can get. And then also, as you're saying, the diversity of thought, you know, to what extent are you just going to get people that replicate everything that you've always done, and how does that allow for innovation? Innovation
is the key thing, I think, here, especially for forward moving businesses, you know, especially in this age of AI. That's the reality. We need innovation, and to have innovation we need diverse perspectives at the table, different thoughts. It's a really interesting one, and it's funny because I've come from a place of like, hey, you know, I wanted to be the CEO of my old business, and I wanted to, you know, is it possible for me? And no one looks like me at the top, and they haven't got the circumstances I've got, and I want these opportunities for my daughters, and I know the statistics for us. I've come from that place. And now I've been operating this space for quite a long time. I'm actually in a place where I wonder if part of this is just human nature. We are effectively, the human race is tribal, you know, we descend from tribal, small community beings. That's our reality. We look for like, you know, you can relate to another black man straight away. You can relate to another father straight away. Someone that, I don't know, supports you said football earlier, but supports
Liverpool, greatest team ever.
Supports Liverpool. Cool. The best team ever. No, I don't know about that. Please don't come for me again.
It's on record.
I'm not into football. But you can relate straight away. A business owner, we're talking business to business. Straight away, there's a relatability there, right? You also know if you were to meet someone, if I was to meet another woman or someone that's got dark hair, or I was speaking at an event the other day and there was a guy there and he was like, oh, my dad's Pakistani and my mum's from Irish descent, same as me. I was like, oh my gosh, Abdullah, me and you, my first thoughts was, come on, Abdullah. Me and Abdullah have become best friends because I can relate. And yet I didn't even like think to really speak to Abdullah before, and probably Abdullah, you to me, I'm sorry if you're listening, because we can relate. Right. And is it actually that we just naturally, you know, spend time and are more inclined to speak to people or hire people or work with people that we can intrinsically relate to, whether that's consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah, absolutely is. You know, I think there's something really powerful about how our brains work and the safety that we find in familiarity. Yeah. I think the issue comes sometimes when we don't challenge that, and when we don't understand the limitations of just restricting ourselves to leaning into, you know, what feels safe, what feels familiar. Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned a number of different demographics there. You know, you're not just talking about gender, or you're not just talking about race, you're also talking about family heritage, you're talking about
eye colour,
circumstances, eye colour, parental status. There's so many different dynamics, and actually it can be quite troubling when organisations or individuals are keen to tick boxes on the notion of a very shallow and superficial metrics, to say gender or diversity, and not really digging into what are people's life experiences outside of that. You know?
But then the question is how? Because if we're sitting at the tops of organisations, and we know, if you look at kind of like the FTSE 100, really, we know that the top exec in that position is probably a white male, an incredible white male, right? That is our reality. Yeah. How do we change that to be the case, so there is spaces and places for everyone?
It's a really good question, I think. As you said, it's like the $1 million question to say.
Because does there need to be these metrics, or is it the opposite of what we're actually trying to do, which is create a sense of belonging?
It's interesting in terms of following the thread through to say, actually, what are the things that have made it easier for white men to lead organisations? Some of it is historic legacy, to say that they've been in positions of power for the last 50, 20, 30, 100 years, whatever it is.
Yeah, longer.
So it feels easier to... It's less of a contentious sell to say, right, we're going from having Steve running the business to having James running the business. Yeah. They both went to the same school, they both grew up in the same area, they both speak the same, they've both been educated in the same way. Therefore, it doesn't feel like there's any destabilization with kind of going from...
We don't like change, do we?
We're going from known to known.
Yeah.
However, you kind of the more extreme that jump, the riskier it can appear. And I think as, again, a society, we need to get comfortable with newness. I think we need to be comfortable with, all right, this doesn't feel familiar. That doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. And I think sometimes there is this tendency for people to fall into this trap of thinking that anything that we do that is different to what we've always done is the wrong choice. And then there's also something psychologically there around to what extent do we resist things that feel unfamiliar? And actually, the more you resist something, the less opportunity you give that thing to succeed.
Yeah, interesting. And kind of the thoughts that came to mind when you were speaking then was, I've been in places and spaces, and we talked about, typically Steve is sitting at the top of an organisation, typically a white male. But then I've also seen where there's these white males that are often given lots of opportunities, actually, for me in my professional career, quite honestly. A lot of my client base, quite honestly as well, biggest supporters and allies, honestly, has been exactly that demographic of actually that demographic then feeling like they're the outsiders and they don't belong. And then what can be created was we're trying to form unity and opportunity for everyone. And actually now there's real resistance. I've had HR directors, white males, say to me, I know I'm not going to be desired now, Scarlett. And I'm like, huh? I know it's going to be harder for me to get a job now. That is scary for me to hear as well. I've got to be honest with you. And I'm like, well, hold on. This is doing the opposite to what we're trying to do. I don't know what your thoughts are.
It's a really, really great question. I think it does feed into that dynamic of... I was actually asked this question yesterday at a talk I was given, to say, does opportunity for all mean that we're stripping back opportunities from certain demographics?
Beautiful.
And I think some of the worry or the anxiety, I think, comes from the way that we communicate what diversity and inclusion is. Like, what is it that we're actually doing? We're not, or we shouldn't be about taking opportunities away from certain groups. What we should be about is broadening our perspective to say, where we've traditionally been very tunnel visioned in terms of what we want for say, leadership of an organisation.
Or we've hired like for like.
Broaden that to say, actually, let's consider a number of different possibilities. It doesn't necessarily have to be a move from Steve to James. It could be a move to a Sheila or an Ade or whatever it is. But again, opening people's eyes, opening people's perspective to understand that talent, my opinion is that talent is distributed equally, opportunity isn't. So how do we create an environment where we are providing opportunities on a more equitable basis?
Pathways and accessibility for everyone.
Absolutely. And I guess, is it something that you faced in terms of that challenge from leaders as a recruiter and as an executive search agency, that you get given an expectation in terms of this is what we're looking for?
Many times. And now, of course, I've been in a position, and also just with the knowledge and that I have, a maturity, that of course I would push back straight away. I don't think anyone could really sort of say that to me. It would be that wouldn't be appropriate in any way, and they would be told that. But when I was younger and I first came into industry, not only did I know I was like the only woman, especially the only young mum and of any kind of ethnicity around me, and I wanted to kind of fit in because I thought that was the best way I could do well, and I needed to do well. I went out to all of the sectors that I was working in, going to factories and things like that. It was, real engineering on shop floors and stuff, and was told many times, and so friendly, so nice, but Scarlett, I need a sales manager, a woman, no offence, that's the best, no offence, because I've got brilliant women that work for me, but I don't think a woman would fit into the team. So if you could be this person, sometimes even talking about football supporting of teams, I'm not even joking, and you're kind of sitting there and I'm making the notes thinking, this feels really uncomfortable, I'm 25 at this point again, completely different now, but so yes, absolutely. I think now people are a lot more conscious, a little bit more cautious. I do wonder what those conversations are behind closed doors, which I'm not as exposed to, quite honestly. But yes, I've absolutely has been the case, and it is, uncomfortable. And I think even as a woman going in there, I think even their opinion on me, and I think you would have faced this in a different way, I know that very quickly I need to gain their respect and credibility, and I've got to really wow them with my knowledge and my this, because they're just going to think I'm just some kind of, just popping in there with my heels on, and I need them to take me seriously really, really quickly. And that was something I was really conscious. So I knew, in comparison to the peers that I had around me, I needed to be so much better in terms of how I came across them, what I knew and my knowledge, because I was going up against other barriers that they wouldn't understand, if I'm totally honest with you.
And is that it's interesting, because when you started, you talked about the lack of representation at senior leadership level, lack of representation, visibility of people that were like yourselves. And I guess as somebody that's potentially on the other side now, what do you feel is the benefit of you being visible in terms of being a role model? And for anyone that is earlier on in their career, what does your presence do for them, do you feel?
I remember when it makes it feel like it's possible for someone like me. It's kind of as simple as that. If I go back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 17 years ago, when I entered the industry, if I saw me, not trying to sound in any way me, but me, someone like me at the top of an organisation, I'd be like, God damn, I can do this, And I really remember, that is one of the key questions I ask is, can I be the CEO of this big global recruitment business that I was the top performer of, year on year, UK, Europe, opened up lots of ED&I divisions, top performer, but I knew that I didn't fit in. I'm at a place in my career now where I use what makes me not fit in, stand out. I'm much more interested in that space now. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to stand out then. But that wasn't my thought process, at all. It was the opposite. And it was a kind of a survival thought process, actually, to be completely honest with you. And I remember my director at the time introducing me to one of two, this is a big footsie business, one of two female directors, so not board level, but female directors that sat in the business. And I remember her speaking to me for 5 minutes. She'll probably never remember me. For 5 minutes speaking to me on an International Women's Day, and in the kind of hallway, and me speaking to her because I was so passionate and I was so ambitious and I had to do well and I needed to do well, me getting tearful. She must have thought, what the hell's wrong with this woman? And I was going through lots of personal life stuff, but almost getting tearful because I couldn't believe, and I couldn't relate to her. We're completely different ages, completely different ethnicities, completely different family circumstances. And yet, just by her being a woman showed me I can do that. I can get to that director level. And I come from a very matriarchal family. It's all women. There's, that they've all raised us. So I'm not coming from a space of thinking of a certain systematic way. But yeah, I still felt that. It was a lot of information.
No, I think it's all important. It adds to that context. And I was going to ask you, has there ever been situations that you've been in where you've seen somebody that is kind of on a gender level similar to you, but you've been disappointed by actually what they've had to say about gender, or what their expectations have been, or how they carry themselves in terms of championing that representation at senior level?
I can only think of a handful of women in my own industry, so not as business leaders and founders, but in my own industry that are of a senior-esque level that I know. that can even in any way relate to this conversation still today. I'd only think could pick up the phone to 2 other women to give you an idea. So there's lots more, by the way. I know there is lots of amazing women, but that's the truth, and that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. You know, it's purpose-led, because it's not. I still don't think we're anywhere near there yet, to be honest. And I don't know if that's slightly the environment, Mac, as well. You know, the recruitment space is often seen as a more sales or external recruitment, a more sales orientated environment. There's a certain a certain resilience. There's a certain, got to deal with, you know, you're dealing with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different, maybe masculine energy that doesn't always feel comfortable for some women. I think that would be really fair to say. But like I said, I've used that to probably now make, think that's my standout then. But yeah, I've said that it's been very difficult at times, and I've definitely felt like I have no one to speak to or could relate to the industry previously. And there's lots of partying and drinking and things like that. I had 2 children at home that I didn't even, for the first nearly 2 years in the business I was in, say that I had 2 daughters at home that were my whole life. That is how much I was conscious of all, and that was my own choices, not how I was made to feel, but I knew that I was not fitting in here.
But there's something interesting in that, in terms of like the lack of comfort potentially that you felt to say, actually, these are my kids, and this is the role that they play in my life. And actually, I think to some extent that probably speaks to that lack of representation, because if you had seen people that were in a position of leadership that had kids, were vocal about their kids, were really present and visible parents, that may have eased you into that, to say, actually, I have kids too, and I'm a 100%. Parent, and these are the circumstances that I have. But again, I guess the reason I asked you that earlier question was, I've often been disappointed by people that have been championed as like the diversity at leadership level, where I've had conversations with them, and their rhetoric, and this was definitely back in the day when I was kind of consulting in the energy utility sector, their rhetoric was, you have to play the game, and it felt like their message was that you can't authentically be yourself. You have to be a version of yourself that is palatable to the powers that be, or senior leaders. And for me, that was really disheartening, and I felt, actually, if you're being championed as the visible representation of me and who I should aspire to be at leadership level, that doesn't send a really positive message. That tells me that you can't be yourself, and you have to be somebody else in order to appease your senior leaders.
But I think that has been the case. If we think about, and I bet we can both think about, certain individuals who might speak a little bit differently when they're around people that they feel comfortable versus when they're around other people, that in itself shows, and there's an adaptability, right? I don't think you necessarily bring your full self to work, or you have to bring your full self to work. So not saying that, but I think that has been the case. A lot of the individuals that we've seen that have done really well historically at senior levels have tried to make the people around them feel comfortable or in some way fit in. I do think on a much more positive note that is changing. I think not to the degree it's needed, but I think that we are talking about authenticity. We're talking about connection. There's conversations of vulnerability that having been had. We've seen even, I've gone from environments where it was suits and 3-piece suits not that long ago, quite honestly. So now I wouldn't think twice if a CEO rocked up in shorts and a t-shirt, and it's interesting. It's changing, I think, where it's, that authenticity is much more respected. But unfortunately, I don't know if that's for the other people surrounding that individual or not, but I've seen it a lot. I've spoken about it a lot with people that I know, and they're saying, I'm into this, I'm going out drinking, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And they're like, I don't even drink, but I want to have this opportunity to be able to be promoted. I want to have this opportunity.
It's a difficult one, because I think some of it is choice, some of it is perception. And I think the disappointing aspect for me was that I felt like a lot of these leaders were, again, as I perceived it, were now in positions where the most senior level in the organisation. So it's like, actually, why are you still choosing to play a game that you don't necessarily have to play? But also, it's a game that I don't think has many wins in terms of, if you genuinely feel like you can't authentically be yourself within this space, within this organisation, is it the right organisation for you?
But me and you, is it a game that they do have to play? Because me and you have built businesses ourselves because of playing them games. Would I be or having felt historically like there's an element of playing, fitting in, or would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
So has it changed that much or not? I think in some ways it has, but in other ways maybe not, and that for me is why representation really, really matters, because unless there is different types of people, experiences, demographics at different levels, at senior levels and board levels in an organisation, number one, it's just not going to attract different types of people. It's kind of as simple as that. And number two, the perspectives and the experiences and the lived experiences of everyone, by the way, is not there. And even if that means somebody coming from council housing up the road, I've got a fantastic mentor, exactly that scenario, and he's talked about, he's that white male demographic CEO that we're talking about, and he's spoken about how uncomfortable he's been in rooms where he's not known certain wines and things like that for people that have come from the Oxford unis, all of that kind of stuff. And he's like, gosh, I was really lucky. I managed to get an apprentice shop floor role, and I've worked my way up through really hard graft, and he's talked about how he hasn't felt like he's fitted in, and how do I fit in. So it's definitely, I think, the case for lots of different demographics, but there has to be, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, those different demographics at those different levels to encourage that change, that innovation, that conversation, and that belonging.
I completely agree with you. I think it's again, for me, it's a dynamic of who makes that change, who's that first person to break the mold, and set a new tone for what great leadership looks like, and the spectrum of things that could encompass great leadership. And I think sometimes it feels a shame that people feel like they have to, again, change who they are or compromise who they are in order to get ahead. It is the game, but I always question, like, what is the game that we're playing and what impact does it have to people, especially when the message that we're sending to younger generations, future generations, is that you have to look a certain way and you have to be cut a certain from a certain mold in order to get ahead. But again, it does feed into this, like, what is the purpose of representation? There's a great saying that I have heard a number of times, which is, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And I think actually there's this, and I think from a gender perspective, it can be seen as like pulling up the ladder behind you. So it's actually, to what extent does representation encourage other people that may come from marginalised backgrounds to step into those roles? To what extent is it their responsibility to open those doors, to open those opportunities?
I think even them, I don't know that there's a responsibility there. I'd hope to think that we feel there is, but actually I think is that fair? No, I don't think it is fair to feel that there is ladders and responsibility there for the individual. But what I think, by just purely by their presence, that in itself provokes change. It opens conversations. That in itself is attractive. And I can even think about, I know a talent partner for an internal business, black male, very little, it's like an engineering energy business, very little diversity in the business. They were really keen to change that. Just by having him there, he brought in so many black engineers. And the question is would that have been the case? I don't know, right? Because I haven't got the alternative data in front of me right now. But there was a relatability straight away, and this is going to be an amazing environment, a safe environment, an environment that I can thrive in because the person I'm speaking to has, and I can speak to him about that. So that in itself, for me, just showcases how important it is.
I kind of disagree with you,
to
be honest. Yeah, because I feel like you mentioned something there around responsibility. And the example I always give is like the kind of Tory cabinet that we had previously, where from an ethnic minority makeup, the most diverse cabinet that there's ever been in the UK.
Yeah,
but the rhetoric was deeply problematic.
Yes.
You've got people not sure if I can name names, but
yeah.
Priti Patel, Sola Braverman, all of these, Rishi Sunak, that said that he doesn't have any working class friends. It's like, you've got these people that feel like representation, but are truly problematic. And I think sometimes there is this expectation that people might have when they come into organisations, that they see a face at senior level that looks like them, and then they get in there and actually the experience is fundamentally different, and it's a case of actually they're being brought into really unsafe environments for them off the basis that there's somebody that looks like them at senior level. When if they have a one-to-one conversation with that person, they'll find that this person is even more problematic. Even more problematic than somebody that doesn't look like them.
That is so interesting, and I hadn't thought about it like that, to be honest with you. I think there is a responsibility for everybody to create an environment that is safe, that is inclusive, that is productive, that is engaging. I think that is everybody's responsibility. And what you've described there is a scary scenario, actually, right? It's a real one, but it's a very concerning scenario. I think when we talked about it, my thought was, okay, if this is somebody that has defeated a lot of odds and a lot of statistics and gotten to the top of a organisation, is it then also their pressure? And hey, I'd hope to think, I know you and I are big advocates of this, so this isn't a personal thought, but is it also their individual responsibility now to change all of this within the organisation as well, when they'd have often been the one that's been the most penalised? For me, no, it's not. Is it a responsibility for them to be part of a culture and encourage and speak out, creating a culture that is safe for other people to come into that business? Yes, it absolutely is, along with everybody else in that business.
But I guess it turns into this kind of chicken and egg scenario to some extent, to say, actually, if that board has historically been homogenous, there's no essence of diversity whatsoever, is it an awareness issue to say, actually, because we don't come from these communities or because we don't come from this background, we are genuinely unaware of the plethora of different experiences that are out there? Then having somebody that does come from a certain community or a certain background should be the catalyst for you to then start thinking more broadly. But if that person is being restrictive or kind of not taking that opportunity to educate people about the need for, more inclusive ways of working or, flexibility in working patterns, etc., then that's a missed opportunity. And I think actually, if it's not that person that champions it, who's going to champion it? And I agree with you in terms of it should be everyone's responsibility, but there are natural gaps in people's lived experiences or what people are aware of generally.
Yeah, it's true, and we see that again in the employee resource groups. I can think of the global business that I talked about. I was the first person in that business, thousands of employees, to do a flexible working request. I mean, can you imagine, business 30 years, fantastic business to me, by the way, and the outcome of that was a 30-minute lunch break 1 day a week, because they just hadn't, and it took 6 weeks to make that decision, which made no difference. I worked through my lunch anyway, but it was interesting to me. And I remember at that time feeling burnt out, exhausted as a mom, top performer again, and still having to fight for something and still coming with an outcome that wasn't in any way helpful. But you are right, it will have helped other women and other caretakers, not just women, that would have made those requests after me, I guess. So I guess there is, but it just feels like the impact is still on the person that's been impacted. And that is the bit that just sits uncomfortably a little bit for me.
You're right, it is unfair. And I often think about it in terms of the challenges that, I'll say we, because I put myself in that box, the challenges that we have that our peers don't. So it's like, actually, I'm fighting not just to do my job, but all of this other stuff that's attached to it. And you see it quite rightly in the ERG network dynamic
100%.
Kind of articulated there. But again, it's like, if we don't do this work, if we don't get involved, who's going to do it?
Yeah, who? And is the understanding there? And often when you're having those conversations, people are so receptive, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Like I wouldn't understand, being a man's experience. So I just wouldn't. I've never walked that journey, you know. So, and I would respect and listen to that as well, and think, oh, I need to be more conscious of that. So there is a place for both. But yeah, it's interesting. I want to ask you something before we wrap up, because this is something that is asked a lot, and I do and ah. As standard, as recruiters, when we talk about ED&I, has it gone too far? We produce diverse shortlists as standard, right? And that for me gives the client an opportunity to access different types of people. So that could be from a different industry, different demographic, right? All of those different things. And they can make the choice then in terms of who they deem to be the best person and can bring the most to the business, and vice versa. What happens in a scenario, in your opinion, where somebody says, okay, skill-wise, this person's aligned, but is a completely different demographic to what we've hired before? Or skills-wise, there's transferable skills, but actually there's someone that is more suited, but there's a big benefit that this person is female or neurodivergent, or there's a different kind of demographic situation going on there. Which should they hire? Not to put you on the spot. Because we always hear the best person. But what is the best person? Because there's so many other benefits and in both scenarios.
And it's a really interesting one.
Come on, Dr. Mac. I'm speaking that into existence.
It's so nuanced. I guess the starting point for me is like legislation. What does legislation allow? So the Equality Act has embedded within it positive action, which means that if two candidates are exactly the same, you're allowed to favour one candidate for the diversity benefits that they bring to your business. I think what you've described there is slightly different in terms of actually the candidates aren't equal.
They're not equal.
They both bring two different things or two different dynamics, two different levels of
But this is a business that's saying, hey, we see the benefit here of this, and we at least want to attract some amazing talent, and we're just not doing that, and what should we do? You know, and I've seen that play out and be asked before. I
think part of it is kind of leadership and organisational maturity. One of my biggest bugbears is people's tendency to lean into like these McKinsey stats that you know, diverse businesses are 35 times more profitable, etc. I
have quoted it a few times myself.
Me too,
I can't lie.
Me too. Back in the day, I've not done it for a couple of years now.
I think I might have done it last year.
I think it's a really superficial perspective to have, and you and I will both know, as people that work closely with this stuff, that actually sometimes diversity makes things harder before it makes things better. And in that, I mean that to say, if you're hiring a woman at senior leadership level and you've never had any woman represented at board level, there are things that you'll be challenged about, whether that's flexible working, whether that's the way you do things. Why are you always talking about football? Why are you always like? Why is this such a?
This is generalizations, by the way. But
definitely.
Just generalizations.
But there may be things that you do naturally or you've done historically that now become uncomfortable because of the level of diversity you've got. So it's not a case of saying we've made our team more diverse, we're instantly overnight going to be more profitable. There's a certain level of pain you have to go through, and I think this is why it's important.
Potential change. Or
challenge. But change is often painful.
Or growth.
Which is why I use that.
Maybe we go with growth.
Look, semantics at this point. But the point I'm trying to make is that things often become more challenging before they improve. And you have to be ready for that element of challenge. And I would never want anyone to go into this naively to think if we make a hire that is different to what we've done historically, overnight things are going to be better. There's a certain amount of challenge that comes with it. And I think that's why it's important to partner with organisations that can kind of walk you through that process.
Yeah, so you didn't really answer the question.
Didn't I?
No,
what was
you
the question?
No, you did. You made some brilliant points. But I was just thinking, which do you hire? Which do you hire?
Me personally?
You personally. I'm putting you on the spot.
Yes, that's fine. Based on where my business is. I would hire the person that has the expertise that I need to go in the direction I want to go. And that probably wouldn't be the person that's a risk because of where our business is at this moment in time. If we were in a situation where we had the privilege and benefit of having time and kind of the luxury of being able to try some innovative things, and we've got a bit of a buffer there to make a couple of hiring mistakes, I'd take a risk and hire the person that adds a different dynamic to the business.
Different dynamic. And that's the bit I think that I was touching on is I think sometimes that's, and I agree, I agree, I would go with the skill set or, someone that's proven but there is great value actually also in the different kind of dynamics that can be brought to the business and the results on the back of it. And the McKinsey stat that you've mentioned, the 35%, which we've all quoted, the reason that I think sometimes even I've quoted that stat is because for some people they don't care about ED&I, and I respect that. And it's actually they care about, quite honestly, they care about their bottom line, they care about profit, they care about paying everyone in their business, their shareholders, all of that stuff. And sometimes I think you do have to talk to those results as well as other benefits as well.
Agreed, but the difficulty and the nuance with that is that actually a lot of these people, if they don't see those bottom line benefits returned within half a year, they will automatically just be like, right, on to the next thing.
No.
For the next 3 to 5 years, they're never trying that diversity thing again because it hasn't worked. And really, again, it's disingenuous to assume that this is going to happen within 6 months or 12 months. Some of it is a 4, 5, 10-year journey.
Yeah, it is. Agreed. So has it gone too far?
In short, to some extent. And that's again, I think this is so nuanced. I think it's gone too far in that I think people have rushed to doing things without fully understanding what they're doing. And I say that in the context of things like the McKinsey stats to say we're investing in diversity because it gives us returns on our bottom line without understanding what does that journey look like, because it's not an instant uptick.
How does it impact?
What about yourself?
I think to some extent yes as well, but I think that's because it's probably similar to what you're saying. I think it's because there's not always a deeper understanding, and I'm saying it from a hiring perspective, of the individual experiences and perspectives that you are bringing into the business. And I think the focus should be more on that journey and that side of things and that thought process than maybe some of the other elements that we do see at play. And I think that's what can make some people feel uncomfortable. But I do think there is a need for these kind of conversations, and that has enabled these kind of conversations to be had today, but also internally in businesses.
Agreed.
We'll agree to agree.